Remedy has established itself as a specialist in story-driven action-adventure games, offering a compelling blend of weird elements woven into the narrative and gameplay. Control is an excellent example of this, encapsulating all that makes the modern Remedy who they are. Today, I'm examining the performance of this game on Linux compared to Windows, so let's get into the benchmarks. "2025 has been the year of the Unreal Engine 5 monoculture, which made Control feel like a breath of fresh air. Remedy developed and still uses its own Northlight engine, like in the masterpiece that was Alan Wake 2. Control was also one of the earlier games that utilized ray tracing to great effect, and I have tested it with and without this visual enhancing yet hardware shaming graphics feature. Remedy's art direction of The Oldest House was quite a highlight, despite its muted color palette, but with all its shiny materials everywhere, the ray traced reflections really stood out in the game. You could admire a highly polished marble floor and glass surfaces everywhere. It was an unusual experience running up a flight of stairs and seeing the reflection of the main character in a glass wall at the top of the stairs as she ascended. I've never seen this in any other game. The only glaring issue I found was the, at times, excessive noise and reflections. Otherwise, Control produced visually appealing content even 5 years after its release. The following table lists the hardware I tested with. Core isolation and memory integrity were disabled on Windows 11. I benchmarked 2 scenarios early in the game. The first was 3 laps around the central executive area, which was the first control point players could unlock. The second test took me from just beyond central executive through the cafeteria to Dead Letters. From there, I turned around and ran back. There was always a combat sequence in the cafeteria with several randomized enemies and physics effects. This should be a good indicator of the expected performance in battles. I only ran this test once due to its length and the amount of testing I was already doing, which included checking out 4 different presets in 2 locations on 2 operating systems. I ran all tests at a native 1440p resolution. If your hardware requires upscaling and you have an AMD card, my Linux gameplay performance video included a tutorial on installing OptiScaler to spoof the DLSS calls and run them through FSR 3 or FSR 4. The latter may be beneficial for all RX 9000 series owners. It works on both Windows and Linux operating systems. However, I only managed to get FSR 3 running on Linux. The central executive area shall represent the moments where you explore the oldest house and scrounge for collectibles. It's an illustration of the quieter moments in the game, although not the most complex in its design. I was surprised to see the difference between Linux and Windows. Both operating systems managed a high refresh rate in both tested settings. The only dip below 100 FPS was in the 1% low department for Linux, but from a gameplay experience, this didn't matter. The interesting part of this was how Windows 11 dominated Linux. On the high preset, it was 24% ahead on average and 15% in the 1% lows. On ultra quality, the lead shrank slightly but remained 16% in favor of Windows on average. The difference in 1% lows hadn't changed. Adding ray tracing to the mix brought both systems closer again, but not close enough to call it margin of error. Windows was still well ahead of Linux, averaging 15% more FPS on RT medium and 12% more FPS on RT high. As I'll get into later, lower frame rates actually work in favor of a good gameplay experience, as counterintuitive as it may sound. The combat sequence shows more of the same, and the overall performance profile was nearly equal to that of Central Executive. Windows 11 outperformed Linux by an average of 18% and 16% in the 1% low range. With frame rates consistently around 100 FPS or higher, both systems felt the same during gameplay. Lastly, the gunfight with RT enabled didn't uncover any surprises. The frame rates on both systems were almost the same as in the Central Executive area, with Linux trailing behind Microsoft's AWE by 13% to 16% across all disciplines. Please note that my results are only representative of AMD GPUs. Using an NVIDIA graphics card might produce wildly different numbers. Control was a fantastic game and I thoroughly enjoy playing on the Xbox, where I initially completed it. Now with powerful ray tracing capable hardware in my PC, I can also enjoy it with the shiny reflections and improved lighting that turn the oldest house into an even more enticing location to explore. Fortunately, you can also do that on Linux. Its performance was not as good as on Windows 11, even more so than in other games I have tested. However, as I alluded to earlier, Control had a peculiar issue with high frame rates. The game did not feel as smooth as the FPS counter would suggest. Only when the performance dropped to 70 or 80 FPS due to my increasing the visual quality would the game feel good to play. I searched the internet for clues and I only found reports of other gamers having the same problem. It appears that this behavior was introduced in one of the latest game updates, which means that to have fun you should limit the frame rate via driver or manual HUD to 70 or 80 FPS, which essentially renders Windows performance advantage moot. And in the case of high quality ray tracing, spoofing Control's DLSS implementation with OptiScaler to utilize FSR3 for a bit of upscaling can help claw back the performance needed to achieve 70 or 80 FPS. I showed how to do that in my Linux gameplay performance video if you're interested. That's all I have for you today. Please consider doing all the YouTube stuff. Thank you for watching.